On. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Interviewing the Legends. I'm your host, Ray Shasho. Alan Paul has released his latest book, Brothers and Sisters, the Allman Brothers Band and the album that defined the 70s, exploring the powerful impact that the Allman Brothers had on the politics and culture of the 1970s, including playing a pivotal role in the election of Jimmy Carter. The book has been featured everywhere, from All Things Considered, Wall Street Journal, to the Washington Post and LA Times. Regarded as one of the finest rock narrative historians, Alan is a unique example of an individual who is both performing the music of the Allman Brothers and the foremost historian of the band. He released a book that explores the surprising ways the band's influence continues to be felt today, from playing a pivotal role in Carter's election to paving the way for today's celebrity media culture, while simultaneously traveling to the country with his friends of the brothers, opening the Allman Brothers official Peachtree Music Festival this summer and heading the Watkins Glen 50th anniversary concert. Author Alan Paul of the New York Times bestseller One Way Out, The Inside History of the Allman Brothers Band, the definitive book on the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame band, and Texas Flood, the inside story of Stevie Ray Vaughan. The latter has been optioned and is being developed for both documentary and feature films. His first book, Big in China, is about his experiences raising an American family, forming a band, and becoming an unlikely rock star in Beijing. He also founded Friends of the Brothers, the premier celebration of the music of the Allman Brothers Band, featuring members of the Dickie Betts and Greg Allman bands. He is a regular guest on radio shows and a frequent contributor to the Wall Street Journal, Guitar World, and other publications. Please welcome New York Times bestselling author Alan Paul to Interviewing the Legends. Hello, Alan.
Hello, how are you?
I'm doing good, man.
That's a great introduction. Wow.
Well, you did a lot of stuff.
Thank you. Yeah, well, when I hear it all laid out like that, it blows my mind. But yes, thank you.
And it's cool because you're also a musician. Is that right?
I am a musician, although I'm definitely a writer who plays guitar, not a guitarist who writes, if you know what I mean. But yes, I am a musician, and I have great friends, and I have good taste in music and musicians, and so I've been able to put together some really fantastic bands, which is an honor and has been a lot of fun.
Very, very cool. I'm going to mention right away, you're going to be at McCurdy's Comedy Club, which I have frequented very many times. It's a great club. Les McCurdy owns the club. October 23rd, I believe. And there's going to be an interview with you from Wade, who I know from Sarasota Herald Tribune, followed by a performance with members of Dickie Betts' Great Southern and the Butch Trucks Freight Train Band, including Thurston Moore, Barry Oakley Jr., and should be awesome.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to that. I'm way overdue to visit Florida on my book tours. I've been all over the place, and it's been way too long since I've been in Florida. So I'm really excited for this one, and it's almost sold out. By the time anyone hears this, it might be sold out. But if you have any interest and you're hearing this, please go look right away at the McCurdy's website and grab a ticket. And I'm going to hang out the next day at Sarasota Books. I haven't quite figured out the time, but late in the afternoon, I'll be over there signing books. So if you can't make it because you can't make it, or because you can't get a ticket, please come say hi there and buy a book, and I'll be happy to sign it and be a relaxed way to hang out and meet some people.
Well, while you're in town, are you going to say hi to Dickie Betts?
I've been messaging back and forth with Dickie's wife, so we'll see about that. I don't know yet if I will or not, but I am in touch with him, and I hope to, and I certainly would like to.
I've covered several benefit shows that Dickie has done. One for a little girl that was 3 years old that had a very bad disease. And Dickie was so cool. I mean, first of all, it was at kind of like a farm, outside space. And it wasn't like a regular concert. These were like all friends and people that just kind of hung out, and they didn't treat Dickie like he's a neighbor, which he is, so it's a very cool feel to the atmosphere. And Dickie struts out. He's had his cowboy hat on. And I mean, he looked like he was right out of a Western,
Yeah, I mean, Dickie is one of the coolest cats around. I think there are a lot of misunderstandings about Dickie, and he's gotten a bad rap. He certainly has a bad temper at times. He has had his demons. He's struggled with his demons. None of that is a secret. But because of that, I think it sometimes obscures the sheer genius of his guitar playing and what a cool character he is. And I think that all of that really, really comes together in Brothers and Sisters. So I don't shy away from some of the tough stuff, but I really accent as well how important he was and how much of a musical genius, frankly, he was. It's really a cool thing, and I'm honored and happy that I had the opportunity to do that.
Yeah, I met Dwayne Betts, who he was performing that night as well with Dickie. And if you close your eyes, you hear Dickie when Dwayne plays. Dwayne is such a great guitar player. He's excellent.
Yeah, Dwayne, it's been a pleasure to watch him really come into his own and grow up. I mean, geez, he's only about 10 or 12 years younger than me, but that was a big 10 or 12 years since when I met him. He was like 15. And I got to know him on the side of the stage, and when he was first sitting in with the Allman Brothers, and he was nervous. And it's one of the pleasures, I think, of getting old, is watching cool kids become cool adults. I feel that way about my nephews and nieces and whatever, and I feel that way about Dwayne. It's great. He played Friends of the Brothers. We had a fantastic book release event in New York City in July 30th, when the book had just come out. And Dwayne joined me along with Lamar Williams Jr. and Valor Truck. So I had 3 of the sons of the Allman Brothers, and they're all great musicians. They're all my friends, which is great. But they're not out there just playing music because they're their father's sons. I mean, they all are great musicians who have their own things to say, very much including Dwayne. So it's really cool. I was hoping that he'd be able to join us in Sarasota, but oddly enough, he's going to be in New York, where I live, that night. So I'm going to miss him, and he's going to miss me, but what are you going to do?
Yeah, he does tour a lot lately.
He has a new record out, which is great. I would urge everyone to check it out. And I'm just really happy for him, and I'm glad that his tour is doing great and everything. But I'm sad that it's taking him away from Sarasota when I'm going to be there.
Exactly. I want to mention too, the tradition continues about the Allman Brothers, because it's the Allman Betts Family Revival, and that's going to be at the Van Wezel in Sarasota, December 12th. And that happens every year now, so that's pretty cool. And, it's got a bunch of all-stars in that. Guys that I know, Larry McRae, the blues guy. Larry's a great guy. Jimmy Hall, who I've had on the show. Should be good. Dwayne's going to be at that as well.
Yeah, that's always a great show. I've been to many of them. And,
right.
Yeah, Larry McRae, since you mentioned, also a good friend of mine, great guy, fantastic musician, happens to live 7 miles from my in-laws. And since I figured that out in Central Michigan, it's made my trips to visit them a lot more fun. I go out and pay him a visit, and we play some guitar and hang out, and I think the world of him. So that's been cool.
I first met Larry at a John Mayall show. He opened up for John Mayall's 80th birthday here in Sarasota. And he was great. He's such a great guitar player.
Great guitar player and a powerful singer. And, one of his relevance to the Allman Brothers greater family, aside from just, he's great. He was the first person to record Soulshine, written by Warren Haynes. And he and Warren are really good friends. They were born, I think, on the same day or one day apart, and they consider themselves sort of brothers from another mother.
Yeah.
And his relationship with Warren and his recording of Soulshine, I think, is what initially brought him into the greater Allman Brothers family.
Well, my connection with the Allman Brothers, I've done a lot of interviews, over 600. but I never got to interview the Allman Brothers. And I've always wanted to interview Greg Allman. And I tried a lot with Dickie. I know David Sparrow, who managed him. I interviewed David, but I interviewed Chuck Lavelle, who's a great guy. Had Les Dudek on the show not long ago, Jimmy Hall, of course. And I met Dwayne. So that's as close as I got to the Allman Brothers.
Well, I might be able to hook you up with JMO if you want to get him on.
Okay.
Dickie has always been elusive. I always had a great relationship with Dickie, but you just never know with him. And he was a guy, never had a cell phone. He's hard to reach. My friend Andy Aladord, who's a member of Friends of the Brothers, was in the Dickie Betts band with Dwayne for 10 or 12 years. And he told me that when Dickie would go looking for a phone, everyone would run because everybody in the band had the experience of Dickie borrowing their phone, and then he walks around talking on it. And when he finishes, he puts it down wherever he is and then can't remember.
I can't remember. That's
so
funny.
He's not always the easiest guy to get a hold of, but once you do, he really can be a pleasure. And I've had some wonderful interviews with him. And it's interesting, as many interviews as I've done. When I first started this book, I was thinking, okay, I was confident that I had enough to do. This is my second book on the Allman Brothers, and I had to initially be talked into it. I mean, it seemed like kind of a crazy idea until I started really contemplating it and digging in. And one of the things I realized is that this era of the Allman Brothers was by far when they were the most successful. So the band obviously is called Brothers and Sisters, and it is about that album, but it's about way more than the album. It's about the whole era. In fact, about halfway through, I wanted to change the name because I thought it seemed too restrictive. But my editor loved it, so anyway, we kept it. But I was sure that I had the material to do this, and I was working on it. I was starting on it, and then after I started, Kirk West is a good friend of mine who was the tour mystic of the Allman Brothers, and we could spend a whole interview just talking about him. But just to sum it up, he really was the central character that connected the band to the fans. He was sort of the assistant manager, you could say, of the band. And before any of that, when the band was broken up in the mid '80s, he was writing a book on the band, and he had traveled all over the country interviewing everyone, every member of the band, wives, crew members, managers. And then he got hired by the band when they reformed in '89. He never wrote the book. So as soon as I told him I was working on this book, he asked me if I would like his tapes. So that was incredible. I mean, you can imagine, as a biographer, to get a cache of never before heard interviews is incredible.
Exactly.
In fact, I knew they would be great interviews because of Kirk's relationship with everyone. Although he was just developing it at that time, it was still, these weren't like normal interviews like you or I talking to someone on the phone for a half an hour. He was on the road with them. He was at Butch Trucks' house. He was at Dickie's house down in Sarasota. I mean, and they were incredible. So he gave me a box, like suit. I went down to Macon where he lives, and I came home a couple of years ago with a suitcase with hundreds of cassettes, and which was great, super exciting. Also very intimidating. What am I going to do with these now? How am I going to deal with them? I digitized them with the help of someone, and I just started going through them, and the interviews were incredible. So they really gave the book so much more depth. I mean, again, I was writing the book anyhow. I'd already signed the contract, but eventually I got to the point where I just thought, wow, what would this book have been in the alternate universe where where I didn't get those tapes? And it's actually almost hard to imagine because they became so essential to it. And the other thing that's cool that I want to mention is that we were able to use a bunch of those quotes. I think there's 40 clips on the audiobook. So the audiobook is a really unique product, I think. I mean, as far as I know, that's pretty rare and unusual. So that was really exciting. And so as much as I had interviewed them, it was great to have new things. And of course, there was no way to go back and get new interviews with
exactly.
obviously with Greg and Butch Trucks,
Yeah.
Ray and Bill Graham, he had interviews with, and Steve
Hmm.
Mazzarchi and the original manager, and Phil Walden, and all these really, really crucial people who are no longer with us. So that was just an absolute gold mine for me. And that's all. I wanted to make sure everyone knew about that because it was really an amazing part of this
It's a
whole.
good thing you had cassettes because technology is a good thing and a bad thing. I just lost 4 interviews on Zoom because they automatically got deleted somewhere, on my hard drive. And I don't know what the hell happened, but it cost me a lot of money and time to try to retrieve these. So I went back to the PR guys and I said, can we do a redo? That's all I could do. But
I've been there, and I've been there with cassettes as well. I mean, I got to the point back in the day when I was using cassettes. I did often, for really important interviews to me, I would use two cassette recorders.
right.
I would have a backup because what are the odds that both of them are going to malfunction? And I remember, in fact, one time interviewing Dickie for a big interview, and I kept looking down at my tape recorder. I remember Dickie finally said to me, "Is that thing working?" And I said, "Yeah, it is, Dickie. I'm sorry. I'm just paranoid that it's not. And that's why I keep looking at it, but it's fine. And I should be able to quit looking at it, but I can't help myself." So
I lost Tom Paxton, one of the great folk guys. He's in his 80s, and Trevor Rabin of Yes. But I think I'm going to get him back on the show again, and we're going to do a redo. So that's good. It's
well, good
tough
luck
when that
with it.
happens. It's tough when
Yeah,
that happens.
yeah, there are times, and that's one of the reasons. The downside to the old technology is, magnetic tapes do, disintegrate, basically, and that was one of the reasons Kirk wanted to do it. I mean, he wanted to do it because we've had this great relationship, and he knew I would,
Mm-hmm.
put a good use. He wanted to
Right.
do them because he wanted to, uh, um, get something out of these incredible interviews he had done. And he wanted to do it because he knew I was going to digitize them and
Mm-hmm.
put them. I still, of course, have the cassettes, but that's just one another big
Yep.
step towards, doubling down on how we can preserve them.
Well, here's what I'm going to do. My book, I've written a few books, but it's called the Rockstar Chronicles, and I got 45 interviews on here. And a lot of the guys have passed away. I got Johnny Winter, I got ELP. Um, but I was going to do series 2, 3, and 4. But instead of writing, I think I'm going to put all the Zoom interviews I did and make a movie out of it, and spend a lot of money to get it done and use a pro, so I won't have to write it.
Yeah. Well, good luck with that. I know. Yeah, I like the audiobook format.
Right.
Also, it does also take a fair amount of work to get that.
Yeah,
But yeah, it's true. I mean, talking sometimes is a lot easier than writing.
it is, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. I read the book. Just so you know, there's a lot of interviewers that don't read the book. When I got interviewed about a lot of my first book, I could tell they didn't read my book, and it pissed me off.
Yeah. Well, I'm used to it. I'm happy if they read it, and I know what you mean. But yes, it is certainly nice when people have read the book. So thank you.
So I'm going to ask you some questions. First of
Yeah.
all, I interviewed Les Dudek. In the book, Les thought he was going to be in Allman Brothers. He really did. And he did. He co-wrote. I think it was Jessica was one of the songs he co-wrote. At that time, I don't think he received any credit. Is that right?
That is right. I mean, just to clarify,
Right.
he says he set up that he. I'm sorry. He says that he co-wrote Jessica.
Right.
Dickie disputes that, and I address that pretty head on in the book. I do think, given the way that they did things, I think it makes total sense to me that he did do exactly what he said, and Dickie just was like, whatever. That was, you know, arrangement, they called it.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's how the Allman Brothers did things, and honestly, it's how a lot of bands did things at the time. uh whoever brought in like the main chords and lyrics. Obviously in Jessica there are no lyrics, but the main concept was the songwriter, and they didn't really do a lot of collaborative songwriting, even though they clearly collaborated on the songwriting. So Les, as an outsider, non-band member, wouldn't have known that and would have had good cause to be upset.
He's still upset about it, by the way, when I talked to
yeah,
him.
well, yeah, I know he is. I interviewed him as well for both the books. And I don't blame him. I mean, it's easy to make fun of Les or something, but the fact is, it's not only credit, it's a lot of money, especially for a song like Jessica.
Right.
And I don't think, some will dispute me on this, I don't think that it was so much a financial thing. I don't think they had that big of a sense of how much money was involved. But for those listening who don't know, because I know a lot of even really great music fans don't totally understand this, songwriting royalties pay a lot more than performance royalties.
Right.
So
Sure.
when you hear Jessica, when you're watching a Tampa Rays baseball game or whatever, and they play Jessica in and out of a song, or you hear it used in a commercial, or you hear it in the background of a movie or TV show, all of which have happened a lot with a song like Jessica, Dickie Betts is getting some money every time that happens. So over the span of a 50 plus years, with a song like that can have that kind of lifespan, it's a significant amount of money. So that's explains a lot why Les was so upset. And eventually that was a source of tension within the Allman Brothers. I mean, the drummers, Butch Trucks and J-Mo, didn't really have any songwriting credits. A handful of things that they really wrote together, like the instrumental Hot Lana. But they felt that on a song like In Memory of Elizabeth Reed, another great Dickie Betts composition, that they really worked that out into a song together. Dickie clearly wrote the melody. He was the genius behind it, and I don't think that's an overused word for that. But they worked it together into a song. So it's an issue a lot of bands have had. The band very much so. Robbie Robertson ended up with after the first album almost all the songwriting credits. They felt they had worked everything up together. And so eventually they had a much lesser touring life because Robbie wanted to quit touring. So he ended up wealthy, and they ended up scuffling around playing in little clubs. So it creates bitterness. Les's opinion is not that weird or rare, unfortunately. It's kind of a part of the history of rock and roll.
Well, he's going to listen to this interview because he's in Florida.
Yeah.
And...
No, I all respect to Les. I mean, he thought he was going to be a member of the Allman Brothers. I don't believe that was ever real.
Right.
But that's, again, no disrespect to Les. He was a great guitar player. Everybody knew that. What he added to the band is easy to hear on Ramblin' Man, especially, which he didn't claim to co-write, but I mean, he played the harmony guitars with Dickie on there, and you can hear Les's playing. I mean, he's a great player. He's probably the most technically proficient player they had in the band. The only other guy who was comparable really was Dan Toller.
Yeah, Dangerous Dan.
Dangerous Dan, who was from Indiana but lived down your way for a long time.
He's a big hero around here before he passed away.
As a Florida guy, even though he wasn't from Florida. Dan was a very gifted guitar player.
Yep.
Les is a great player and contributed a lot to those two songs in different ways. And but I just don't think they ever were going to add another guitar player at that time. It was post-Dwayne. It was too emotionally grueling to contemplate. And Les described to me, and this is in the book, when he did do Ramblin' Man, that was the first time in the studio that another guitar player had played with the band. And he said he stood there playing those guitar harmonies live with Barry Oakley staring a hole through him. That was his description. And I think that's what life would have been like on stage every night. They just weren't ready to handle having another guitar player. And unfortunately, things turned sort of bad between them eventually, so that in later years when they were ready to have another guitar player, they never called Les, which he also was upset about. And I get that too, but that's just
I like Les. I followed him since day one, since his first album. He just put out another album recently, not too long ago when I interviewed him. He's good.
Yeah.
He's a good player, great player.
Great player and a good guy and a good
Yeah,
interview.
exactly. Something else in your book I never knew about. Greg sold his rights to Melissa to producer is this Steve Alamo for $250 to buy a ticket to LA, and he got half of that back. Did he get the whole thing back eventually, or
No, I don't think so.
really? Is that right? That's interesting.
Who's still alive is making money every time you hear Melissa. Yeah, he and again, as outrageous as this is and sounds like, it wasn't uncommon. I mean, this is a thing that happened. Guys sold the rights to songs. Willie Nelson told a story. You know, he wanted to move from Texas to Nashville, and he was playing guitar in a band, and he needed some money to move his family, and so he brought some songs he had written to the band leader, whose name is escaping me. I'm sorry, but and offered, said, you know, if you give me $500, I'll give you these 5 songs, and he played them for him. Among those 5 songs were Crazy and Nightlife.
Oh my goodness.
And the band leader was very ethical. I would say. He said, Willie, those are hits.
Right.
I can't buy those from you. And he said, well, you know, I need money. And he said, what do you need? He said, well, $500 to move my family to Nashville. He said, well, I'm going to lend you $500.
Oh, that was nice.
Incredible. Really incredible. That was not what Steve Alamo, I believe it's pronounced, did.
Yeah.
Greg had been out in LA, and he came back to Florida, and he was kicking around. And they did some recording with the 28th of February. I'm sorry, the 31st of February, which was Butch Trucks band. And they recorded the first ever version of Melissa, and they recorded a really beautiful song Greg wrote in tribute to Martin Luther King Jr. when he was assassinated, called God Rest His Soul.
Right.
And those are the 2 songs he sold for the money to get the ticket. And when it came, and then that's why they never recorded Melissa. And when Eat a Peach came out, or I'm sorry, when they were recording Eat a Peach, Greg wanted to add it because Dwayne had loved it. It was sort of a tribute to Dwayne,
right?
But Alamo still owned it, and so Phil Walden, the Allman Brothers manager, went to him and said, "You're going to have to give Greg half of this back, or he'll never record it." So he wisely realized it was better to own half of a song that Greg would record on a hit album rather than all of a song Greg would never record. So he gave back half of it, and that's it. But so he's sort of a villain, you know. Greg in one of those Kirk interviews and quoted in the book called him something like an unprincipled son of a bitch. But again, he was doing, it wasn't anything completely outrageous at the time. But yeah, luckily Greg at least got half of it back, and thank God, because he wouldn't have, we never would have heard it otherwise.
Well, you said also that Greg didn't even like the song. Is that true?
If Greg said that, I mean, to be perfectly honest, I don't believe him.
Okay.
I thought he was just saying that. I do, you know, that was partly his explanation for why they hadn't recorded it, because it was the first song that he wrote that he really felt was good. So he did like it. I don't think he actually even said he didn't like it. I think what he said more appropriately was he didn't think it was appropriate for the Allman Brothers.
Okay.
It was too soft.
Right.
But this way, if they hadn't recorded it on Eat a Peach, I think he would have recorded it on Laid Back, his first solo album, just a year later, because that album was more in that flavor.
Yeah.
But that's always been the beauty of the Allman Brothers, is that they can do Melissa and One Way Out, and Jessica and Blue Sky, which, you know, they're all very, very different corners of the musical universe. That you would almost, you know, if you didn't know and you heard, you'd think they were 4 different bands. But it's all seamless for them. It always was. So, you know, Greg had his issues with whether it fit, but ultimately, obviously, it really did, and became one of his and the band's signature songs.
You made a good point. You know, I know they hated that Southern rock genre, and they're 100% right, because a lot of people that I've talked to, a lot of, you know, great musicians say they were Southern progressive rock, you know, and they had elements of jazz. They had, you know, a little bit of everything. They were.
Dickie in particular resented that.
Yeah.
phrase.
I don't blame him.
And I think it had to do just with what the genre came to be associated with.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think it's that uncommon. I mean, the Beatles didn't consider themselves British Invasion,
Right.
or the Beatles, and then the British Invasion is what they launched.
Yep.
I mean, I doubt that Kurt Cobain called himself grunge, right? I
Mm-hmm.
mean, it's just Kurt Cobain and Nirvana, and grunge
Right.
followed. And so I think if you are creating a new musical template, you don't then want to be associated with all the people copying it or
Mm-hmm.
coming after you. So and especially in terms of Southern rock, by the time that phrase was really being widely used, it came to be so associated with Leonard Skinner, I mean, with
Right.
Confederate flags, with Jack Daniels on stage, and
Exactly.
that type of stuff.
Yeah.
That the Allman Brothers didn't really want to be associated with. They did, and I addressed this in Brothers and Sisters. They did briefly in this period use a Confederate flag on stage.
Right.
They all ended up regretting that, wishing they hadn't done it. It was not something they were proud of. I mean, they had two black members in this,
Mm-hmm.
two guys from Mississippi, Lamar Williams, and of course J-Mo, one of the founding members. And so they all sort of regretted that. And Greg, by the end of his life, really regretted it and said, basically, I'm paraphrasing, but if this flag makes people feel bad, I say burn them all.
Right.
So I think it had as much to do with culture as music in terms of why they didn't want to be associated with that.
Right. Another Sarasota connection to the Allman Brothers, Jerry Wexler. He died here. He's buried here in Sarasota. And he ended his life in Sarasota, retired here. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, that's interesting. And
Yeah.
Jerry West was one of the founders of Atlantic Records,
Yep.
and um, huge figure in the history of R&B, and to some
Mm-hmm.
extent, well, to a lot of extent with rock. I mean, with Cream, and he was a huge believer in Dwayne Allman
Mm-hmm.
from the beginning. Some of the other guys in the Allman Brothers resented Wexler a little bit because at Dwayne's funeral, he gave this very moving eulogy. He was one of the speakers. But afterwards, apparently, in talking to Phil Walden, their manager, he said something like, well, I guess the Allman Brothers are done now. His vision of the band was completely that they were Dwayne's band.
Right.
Capricorn Records was distributed by Atlantic, I should say, because some people might be listening to this and going, well, what do they care what Atlantic thought?
Right.
They were essentially on Atlantic Records. Atlantic was distributing all their records. So they ended up leaving Atlantic, Capricorn Records. And I think to some extent, Phil manipulated that thing that Wexler said to fire up the band as to why they were leaving. I'm sure he used it as a little bit of an excuse and a motivational tool, because he then switched over to Warner Brothers.
I interviewed Don Felder and learned that he learned to play slide guitar from Dwayne. I didn't know that. It's pretty cool.
It is pretty cool.
Yeah.
I cast a little bit of doubt on Don's story.
Really?
Well, if you look up the dates that he talks
Okay.
about, it doesn't really quite line up with when they would have crossed paths. So
Okay.
I don't know. I had the dates all in front of me. I don't want to I'm not calling him a liar or anything. I don't know. There's something a little off in this story.
Okay, this is going viral.
Yeah, I mean, anybody can do a little research and check it out. Dwayne was out in California by the end of '67 in Los Angeles. But Dwayne and Greg were a huge influence. And here's the thing. I'm sorry, he wasn't playing slide at that time.
Mm-hmm.
Dwayne didn't start playing slide until the end of his time in Los Angeles. The first thing that he recorded slide on was actually Melissa, the original demo version of Melissa that was on that 31st of February album I was talking about. And then he wasn't really heard on slide until he popped up in Muscle Shoals. And so the time that, and it might just be that Don just has his dates, his years wrong, but the time that he talks about learning slide from Dwayne was a time when Dwayne was not yet playing slide guitar.
Interesting.
That's the disconnect. And
Okay.
he tells that story a lot, and I don't want to doubt him, but there's something, listen, I, interview all these guys, and I catch a lot of discrepancies like that.
Yes.
And it's that people are lying. It's just that life is long and they get confused with dates. And that's why, in all honesty, I think a book like mine is a little more true than like a celebrity memoir,
Hmm.
because the celebrity memoir is for the most part one person talking and somebody writing it up.
Hmm.
Uh, I think the amount of fact checking that what the things that people say is really varies, and sometimes it's none. Whereas I talk to many people often about the same event, and I find conflicting information
Yep.
all the time. And then I research it and I solve it the best I can, or figure out who has the most reason to make sense. And when it's not clear, I'm pretty upfront about that in the book. I'll say, he said this, he said that, blah blah blah. So again, I just to reiterate, I'm not saying like Don is lying. I just, there's something off about his story. But um, Dwayne and Greg were huge figures when they were still teenagers, all
Hmm.
through first Florida and then really
Hmm.
the whole Southeast. They were touring
Right.
around different bands, mostly with the Almond Joys,
Almond
which was
Joys.
up
Yeah.
in California. The record company changed the name to the Hourglass, but they had a huge impact on Leonard Skinner. And it's not
Hmm.
that they were friends, but they played in Jacksonville, this place called the Comic
Right.
Book.
Right.
And Gary Rosington has told me, I interviewed Gary many times over the years. Lastly, for this book, I'm very, very happy I got to talk to him for one last interview for this.
Yep.
Um, and Gary told me that like standing in front of them was just incredible, because they were already worshiping Clapton and these guys, especially Free, with Paul
Hmm.
Rodgers and Paul Costa. Um, but seeing guys who were more or less their age, or just a few years older than them, from the same background, more
Yep.
or less, Florida kids, playing like that, made a much bigger impression, or a different impression. The impression was, we can do this.
Hmm.
We can, if they can do it, we can do it.
Right.
Which was not the case necessarily with seeing Eric Clapton, who was easy to keep as this. He was another guy, a different guy from a different world. So they just had a huge impact, and you can't underestimate that. And I'm absolutely sure Don Felder was one of those guys. It's amazing to think, when I did my Stevie Ray Vaughan book, and I realized that there was a point in the I don't know, late 60s, I guess, early 70s, where playing around University of Texas frat parties, there was Stevie Ray Vaughan and Jimmy Vaughan
Hmm.
and Don Felder. I mean, I'm sorry, Don Henley
Right.
of the Eagles. And in Florida, you had something like that going on, where you had Dwayne and Greg. Soon you had the guys that became Leonard Skinner. You had Tom Petty and Mike Campbell, Stephen
Yep.
Stills, Don Felder. I mean, these guys were all, teenagers, or early, 17 to 20 years old,
Hmm.
kicking around, playing the same circuit. And Dwayne and Greg were just a little bit older than the other guys. A couple years, of course, makes a big difference at that age. And they were doing it. So they were heroes to them all. But I just love the idea that, there might have been a night in Gainesville where all those guys were playing within blocks of each other at fraternity parties. I mean, just wild, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Also, the Outlaws were from Florida as well.
Yeah, they're all,
Yeah.
I believe they were all Tampa guys, or at
Yeah.
least the band, they were from Tampa. I'm pretty sure individual.
I was friends with Joe Lala. Do you know him?
Yeah,
Remember Joe Lala?
yeah. I mean, I know those guys. I
Yeah.
don't know. Never
Manassas. He
seen
was
them.
with Steven Stills. And of course, Steven
Yeah.
Stills kind of grew up in Ybor City, and he probably learned his Spanish in Ybor City because he talked with a fantastic Cuban accent, the way he speaks Spanish, you know. So yeah, that whole area there, Tampa, Ybor City, they brought a lot of great music, Mike Pinera also, yeah.
Yep. Ride Captain Ride.
Ride
And
Captain Ride, yeah. That's Joe was in that band. Joe Lala, he was a Congo player as well.
and
I
they
didn't.
were and they
Go
were
ahead.
apparently a big influence on Greg. I'm sorry, on Dwayne, and his conception
Hmm.
of what how he wanted the band to sound, which was two drummers,
Right.
I mean, an organ and two lead guitars. It's interesting. Tom Doucette, harmonica player who lives in Sarasota,
Hmm.
um, he's the one who told me that they were a big influence. That was Blues Image.
Yeah, Jimi Hendrix liked them a lot too. He said they were a great band. Maybe I missed this in the book. I didn't see anything about the Allman Brothers with the Sarasota Bradenton connection. And what I always heard were the stories at the Orr House in Bradenton Beach in the late 70s, and that Greg had an outstanding tab at the bar, but was forgiven because the bar burnt down. Do you know all about that?
Yeah, well, the reason it's not in the book is just simply because it happened after the period.
Later, yeah.
But the book basically ends for the most part 1976 when they broke up for the first time.
Right. What
I
did
wasn't,
happen anyway
I wasn't,
in
oh,
Bradenton and Sarasota? Because
yeah, I really don't know. I mean,
really,
Greg lived there in that time period. Most of the time that he lived in the area were the really, really heavy drinking years for him, of which there were many. But Greg would have periods where he really was heavily drinking, and
yeah.
he was in the Bradenton, Sarasota area was one of them. And I've met a lot of people over the years who've told me stories about walking into bars, and there was Greg sitting there, and he would often get up and play with bands. He would just play with like a house band with places, and was obviously really cool for the people who were there, but it wasn't a super happy time for him, I don't think. But I don't know specifically about that bar tab, but the way you described it makes perfect sense to me. I don't doubt it. I don't doubt it one bit. And I'm sure it's not the only place where he had huge, outstanding bar tab. Because these were rough years for him, honestly. I mean, his drinking was heavy. They weren't making a lot of money.
Yeah.
And it was really during this era in the 80s, when Kirk did the interviews I referenced before. It's one of the reasons I think the interviews are so good. They were close enough to these glory years in the period that's discussed in this book, which is basically 1971 to 76,
Right.
that the memories are still pretty fresh. It's not like 30, 40 years later, but far enough away that they have a little perspective. And fallen so far, each of them in their different ways are doing different things, and they're realizing what they had and what they lost. And so they're much more reflective about it. And because they're not currently together, they don't have any, I guess you would say, political grudges with one another. And so I feel like they were unusually honest and forthright about the way they're talking about their own behavior, and about each other. And so it's just a really, really cool part of the interview.
Greg had it really rough during the conviction of Scooter Herring, didn't he?
Yeah, and I cover that really extensively
Yeah,
in the
you do.
and that's two of the things that he talks about a lot in these in those interviews with Kirk that became very hard to talk about him with in later years. And I did a lot of great interviews with Greg, but there were a couple of things that were fairly hard to get to, pretty much to the point that you knew you shouldn't really go there. One was the trial, and two was his relationship with Cher.
Really?
And he was very open about both of them in these interviews with Kirk, which is part of what also made them really, really valuable. But yeah, the trial was rough. I think that he possibly got really bad legal advice, but the fact is he was really getting squeezed by the feds. And
Right.
they were building a much bigger case. And I think it's important to note, I mean, they weren't really after Greg, I don't think, although there are people who, within the band and the organization who really felt they were trying to get someone at Capricorn because of the label and the band's involvement with Jimmy Carter. I can't, I never, it's impossible to prove that, but it's not a crazy paranoid idea. But the main thing is they were really, really after this guy who ran the local Dixie Mafia, and it was called the Hawkins Gang.
Right.
And they were supplying drugs in the area. They controlled the drugs, and Scooter was getting stuff from them and then selling it to Greg. That's a bit simplified, but that's more or less it. And so they were trying to squeeze Greg on Scooter so that they could squeeze Scooter
Hmm.
on the Hawkins gang.
Right.
And that's pretty much was the whole deal. And Greg just got stuck in the middle there. They threatened him with prosecution. They offered him immunity from prosecution if he testified. So he testified. He was really hung out to dry. No one from the band supported him. They were all in Macon, but they didn't go to the trial. Um, it's worth noting that they were about to fall apart. It's not like they were in great shape and that blew it up. It was just like the house of cards was so shaky that all it needed was a little flick and it went over. And that trial was more than a little flick. But it wasn't just them. I mean, Jerry Garcia called him a rat, maybe.
Hmm.
Stage. Greg believed he did anyhow, and that's what led to him, really disparaging the Grateful Dead. It wasn't a musical thing. He had liked them. They had been close. Other guys in the band remained close with them over the years. But Greg, couldn't get past that. Rolling Stone went as far as to say that Greg might never perform again in
Hmm.
1976. Now, that seems insane now because we all know how much he performed after 1976, but that was the vibe at the time. So Greg
Yeah.
really did through the ringer with that. I mean, there's just no
Well, he
no
was, like you said, he had it from both sides. He had the feds, he had a gangster that could rub him out. I mean, it was a tough situation for him. Then his friends are calling him a rat. I mean, that must have been tough.
yeah, he
Had a
was
feel for the guy,
he was in an unenviable spot. There's just
Yeah.
no two ways about it, and none of us would want to be there.
Yeah, hell no. I want to talk a little bit about Mr. Allen Paul now. You were born in Anchorage, Alaska. That's pretty cool. And you came out of Alaska and you attended University of Michigan.
Yeah, but wait,
Uh,
I need to give one clarification.
okay.
Everything you said is technically true. But I grew up in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. My family moved
Okay.
when I was really little. My father is a physician. He's a
Hmm.
retired pediatrician.
Oh,
He
cool.
joined the service. He was in the Indian Health Service, which is a
Hmm.
branch of the Navy.
Right.
And he served in, he was assigned to a base in Vietnam. He was staying out of Vietnam. He was assigned to a base in Alaska. They lived there for a couple of years. They really liked it. And they moved to Anchorage,
Hmm.
which is where I was born. So it's all true, but I just wanted to clarify. I didn't like grow up in Alaska, although I was born there.
Well, let me know if there's any fake news. Okay.
Like, I don't want anyone calling me up, someone I grew up with, and going, "Hey, what are you talking about?"
Hey, you were a Steeler fan, man. What are you talking about?
Absolutely a hardcore Steeler fan.
Oh yeah. You became managing editor of Guitar World, which is right.
Yep.
And you were there for about 5 years. You worked for Slam magazine. You had publications in Slam magazine, the New Yorker, People, and Entertainment Weekly. Very, very cool. And then the big move, you went to China,
Yeah.
and because of your wife, I guess, right?
Absolutely. Yep. Everything you're saying is right on.
Okay, you got to get together with a guy that I know. His name is Michael Franklin. He's a producer. Do you know Michael Franklin?
No, I don't.
Big China guy. I mean, he's always in China. He's got a big connection out there. His wife's Chinese. I mean, he knows everybody. He's working on the 1000 Hands Part 2 with John Anderson. He's got a lot of special guests on that new album. He did something with Mike Panera recently, but you guys would hit it off. You really would. Um, Talk to me a little bit about China, because you made it big as an artist, as a music artist out there,
Yeah, I
right?
mean, China was an incredible experience for me. Moved there in 2005.
Right.
Uh, we had 3 kids at the time. They were 2, 4, and 7.
Hmm.
Really didn't know what I was gonna do. My wife had this huge job. She was running all the coverage for the Wall Street Journal in
Very cool.
China. It kind of came out of the blue. It's not something she had been trying for or we had been looking to do. Most of the other journalists over there were really experienced China hands, people who studied it in college and knew the language. And this happened through just sort of a weird series of flukes. They needed someone. She put her hand up because I sort of urged her to, and
Hmm.
it happened. Um, it seemed lunatic to move over there with these little kids. But it went really great for all of us, and things settled down. And I quit my jobs. I at that point was a senior writer for Guitar World and Slam. I had been doing those two together for I think about 6 years or something. I had a great gig, where I was totally freelance, but I had monthly income from both those places. I went to
Right.
basketball games and concerts for my job. Was able to be home while my wife commuted to New York. We live in New Jersey. Take care of the kids. So I had a great setup, but I had a sense it was maybe going to come to an end because money was getting tighter at the magazines. And I just thought, oh, what the hell, let's just do something different and shake things up. And so I
Hmm.
urged her for that job because I just felt like worst case scenario, like we hate it or something, we'll still be smarter and better on the other end of it. So it'll be worth it. And we didn't hate it. We loved it. Turns out we were there during an absolute golden era. There was no way to know that at the time, or, took quite a few years after we were gone to realize that the world we lived in is gone, doesn't exist anymore. There's virtually no journalists.
Hmm.
All the things that people thought was our reality of oppression and
Right.
but never was really is now. So it's sad. But we were there during a period of great optimism. China was booming. Um, it was an exciting time. And yeah, I stumbled into meeting these incredible Chinese musicians. One
Hmm.
guy first, his name was Woody Wu,
Hmm.
and I had a broken guitar. He had a guitar shop. He fixed it. We started talking. Woody's about 12 years younger than me, I think. At the time, I was 40. He was 28. And first time I met him, he was covered in tattoos. He had multiple ears piercings in both his ear and nose piercing. But when he took his jacket off and I could see his arm, I saw on his left arm, he had SRV tattooed and a picture of Stevie Ray Vaughan.
Really? Very
Yeah,
cool.
almost like a jailhouse tattoo. I mean, it was an amateur tattoo. His later tattoos were much nicer. That was one of
Uh-huh.
his ones. But I was just amazed, and so I couldn't believe that I was in China. I had found a guy with a Stevie Ray Vaughan tattoo. He couldn't believe that a guy from Guitar World magazine and who had written, I wrote liner notes on the Stevie Ray Vaughan box set, had walked into his shop in Beijing. I mean, each of us were just sort of shocked to have found each other. And then he asked me if I would like to play with him, and I sat in with a band he was with. He liked
Hmm.
what I did. There was a restaurant near my house where the owner kept asking. I had sat in with some people there, and she actually liked my singing, which was like a revelation to me because I just sang when I had to, when there was when there was a song I knew that other people didn't know. I didn't
Right.
consider myself a singer. This was an American woman who owned a restaurant with her Chinese husband, and she said to me afterwards, "I love your singing. I want you to sing at my place more." Wow. Okay. No, her name's Lisa Minder. I should just shout her out because that was an encouragement. You never know when a little nice word to
That's
someone
right.
makes a difference. Because she really changed my life because um, I got a little more confident and then I met Woody and he wanted to do something. So I said, well, I know someone who let's do an acoustic duo because I have someone I can get us a gig like now. So we did that. It went well. We started adding other musicians, and then
Hmm.
eventually, when we got to a point, Woody brought in this incredible rhythm section. We had one other American guy who was actually the Treasury Department representative to
Huh.
China. He played saxophone. And so we formed a really unusual band, and then we had a lot of fun with it, and we got pretty successful. We won an award for best band in Beijing. We toured all over China, played festivals. It was an amazing experience for me.
That's a
And I
great
got,
story, man. What
yeah,
kind of music did you guys play?
we played blues.
Oh, you played blues.
Yeah,
Awesome.
but we were really far from like a Stevie Ray Vaughan type of
Uh-huh.
blues. But although we both obviously love Stevie. In that band, I play acoustic guitar.
Hmm.
Woody mostly played lap steel.
Okay.
Initially, I would switch between electric and acoustic, and Woody would switch between electric and lap steel. But eventually, we just felt like we found our sound more when he stuck on lap steel and I stuck on acoustic. That's when I really started becoming more of a primarily acoustic guitar player because I just found my voice on it in that setting. And Dave, the other American guy, played alto sax. So, um, we literally once we were really hitting it, we didn't even have an electric guitar properly. We had an acoustic guitar, lap steel, and saxophone as the front line with the great. So it was unusual. And we started incorporating some traditional Chinese instruments. Our bass player, fantastic bass player, also played a lot of traditional Chinese instruments. So he would bring out the guqin, which is this
Right.
thing that yeah, we had a lot of fun with it. I mean, anyone can go up if you go, and the band, I should mention, we had the rather humorous name of Woody Allen.
We,
Woody, Woodie, Allen, A-L-N, which are our names. And I need
that's
to say
good.
that, yeah, if I knew when we played that very first gig that we were going to take it as far as we did, I probably would have used a different name. But I'm
Yeah.
glad that I did, because it's funny and whatever. But it was just kind of a joke, and it worked for expats because they would just laugh and understand the joke. And Chinese people just took it pretty literally for the most part, like the
Right.
Woody Allen Band. Just made sense. It's literally our name. So
That's cool.
yeah, but you can look up Beijing Blues, Woody Allen, on YouTube. You'll find some
Oh,
great
good.
videos.
I'm going to
Yes,
post them. I'm going to post some videos on the site.
yeah, that would
Yeah.
be great. And
Yeah, man.
we had a great time with it. And I came back in 2009, and I've been playing gigs ever since. I mean, a whole side of my life that I've done, I don't know if I ever would have tapped into in the way I did. Obviously, I played guitar for years before that, but I was more of a house guitarist,
Right.
and I would sit in with friends, play at parties. I mean, it's not like I had never performed or played with people, but I had never really had a proper band and toured and played gigs. Certainly not as a front man. To the extent I did, it was as a rhythm guitarist in other people's bands. So whole new thing, and opened up a whole new world for me. And I'm really happy it did. And who would have thought, in China.
Exactly. You just never know, man. Last time I talked to Les Dudek, he says, I'm looking to play with someone. So give him a call.
Les is really friendly with Junior Mack, who's the other guitarist and Friends of the Brothers,
Yeah.
my band. And Junior went and saw him just recently in New York. Unfortunately, I couldn't go. I was out of town, I think, that weekend. So yeah, Junior would be great with Les. Actually, he's probably more appropriate to him than I am. And they know each other, and who knows, maybe that will happen.
Yeah. Yeah. I like to see a tour. That'd be cool. Here's our final question, and I ask musicians this question, so I'm going to rework it to put it in a author form, if I could.
Sure.
If you had a Field of Dreams wish, and that's my favorite movie, Field of Dreams. Let's see, to interview or maybe write the book about somebody from the past or present, who would that be?
Well, I mean, the two guys that I would most like to interview for sure are Dwayne Allman and Stevie Ray Vaughan, uh, because I've dedicated so much of my career to get to know those guys and
Right.
interviewing so many people, and I feel like I really know them. So one of the things I would be so curious about is if how surprised I was if I could meet them right now. I feel like I have such a good beat on both of them.
Yep.
And I'm sure there's some things about both of them that would just surprise me. And with Stevie, especially, if I could interview him and talk to him, I would less even want to ask him questions, and I would more just want to tell him that 30 years after he died, he's still really affecting people with his sobriety.
Yep.
I know this for a fact. I know people who feel like their lives have been saved by him now. People who were barely or not even born when he was alive. Some friends and relatives of mine. And just from writing Texas Flood and researching Stevie, I learned so much about sobriety and alcoholism and recovery, and so much so that even like I interviewed David Crosby, and we're talking about, and he asked me, he said to me, I guess you're in the program, right? And I said, no, I'm not actually. And he said, oh, nobody's ever talked like this to me about it that's not. You don't seem to really understand it. And it's not any like brilliance on my behalf. It's just because I took that really seriously, and I was
Right.
fascinated by it, and I learned so much through him. And so that's what I would want to tell him, because I know how important it was to him and what it would mean to him. I also would love to have interviewed Jerry Garcia in a really meaningful way, and Bob Dylan. Bob, of course, is still with us, but doesn't do much in the way of interviews. And when
No,
he
not at all.
does, I don't, he doesn't really, he's sort of playing a persona. I mean, I don't know who Bob Dylan really is. I think Bob
Exactly.
Dylan's whole life has been playing the role of Bob Dylan. He's an
Right.
actor. But and not coincidentally, the four guys I just named, Stevie Ray Vaughan, Dwayne Allman, Bob Dylan, and Jerry Garcia, are four of my most favorite and important musicians. So of course I would love to, get to know them more.
I interviewed Kenny Wayne Shepherd a few weeks ago, and Stevie Ray Vaughan was his big influence, and he's the guy who got him into playing the guitar. His dad was I think a DJ and a promoter, and he promoted a Stevie Ray concert, and he got to meet him when he was a teenager.
Yeah,
and then
and he's had Chris Slayton from Double Trouble has been his drummer for the most part for years, and the backup for Chris when he can't play is a good friend of ours named Sam Bryan, who plays with Brent sometimes. So yeah, Kenny's a good guy, and another person upholding this tradition that I care about so much. So
yeah,
to him as well.
We probably know a lot of the same people, I think.
Yeah, I mean, we have a lot of the same musical interests, and
exactly.
Yeah.
I want to say one thing about the Allman Brothers, man. There's a few people out there that are no longer with us that really hurt rock and roll, and one of them is the Allman Brothers. The other one I think of is Johnny Winter, because these guys toured constantly, and they always put the rock and roll name out there and promoted. But the Allman Brothers Band, there's something special about that group. They're very, I don't know, there was like a serious sound, they meant what they sang about, there was kind of a dark side of some of the music they sang about, true to life, real true to life, things that they went through, and nobody else does that. Nobody else,
Well, I mean, I think other people do it, but nobody else does it quite like the Allman Brothers.
No, yeah.
And that's why I've dedicated so much of my life to writing about them and listening to them, exploring them. There's a complexity there and a depth. And they had two primary songwriters and singers, Greg Allman and Dickie Betts, who were very different from one another musically, but also each have their own depth and variety in their own material. Dickie wrote Blue Sky, and Dickie also wrote Ramblin' Man, which have these country influences.
Right.
He wrote In Memory of Elizabeth Reed and Jessica, which, so he has this complexity. Greg as well. Greg had this sensitive singer-songwriter side, which I explore quite a bit in Brothers and Sisters, and people don't think of him that way. But if you think of Midnight Rider and Melissa, Come and Go Blues, and you think of them in a slightly different context and try to picture them as coming out from a Jackson Brown type guy in Laurel Canyon, it makes total sense. That was a huge part of Greg as well, and obviously his blues side speaks for itself, and I think people know and understand that better, and that's more what they associate Greg with. But he was both of those things. He was all of those things, and I once said to Greg something like, in an interview, I said, well, I guess because he was describing to me how much he was influenced by Jackson Brown and Neil Young in particular, and Tim Buckley. And I said, I guess ultimately what you did was try to write and sing songs like them, write songs like them, sing them like Bobby Bland or Ray Charles.
Yeah.
And Greg said, that's it, man. That's my deal. And that's a unique thing. I mean, who else is like that can sing like one of the all-time great blues guys and can write a song like Come and Go Blues?
Exactly. He had a great voice. He had a wonderful voice.
It's both,
I didn't realize how much he was in trouble with drugs. And, I knew he had trouble with drugs, but I didn't know how deep he was until I watched that Dan Rather interview, because he just spilled his guts, saying everything that he was on. And man, I'm surprised he lived that long, honestly.
It's very sad that Greg didn't make it to 70, but I
Yeah,
think a better way to look at it is just what you said. It's amazing he lasted as long as he did. And, his music is a blessing for all of us, and it
yep,
will outlive us. And, that's what I try to do in my books, is just bring those musicians to life and bring the music to life. And so that
exactly.
I think that my books enhance the music. It's a matter of just understanding it better.
Hmm.
That's what I look for in reading about music, and so that's what I try to provide. Try to get as deep into that as I can.
Exactly. So what's next for Alan Paul? I mean, are you gonna another book in your mind right
Working on
now,
a
or
couple of things, and I don't know what's going to like rise to the top, so I don't want to say yet. But one of the things I'm doing that eventually I definitely will finish and come out is an updated, expanded version of my first book, Big in China, all about
okay?
music experiences in China,
And
because I
that'll be
do it.
good timing too, I think.
I think so. I don't really know. I just want to do it. So,
Yeah.
and I'm still promoting Brothers and Sisters hard. I'm going to be all over the place: New York City on the
Hmm.
12th of October, Philadelphia on the 14th, Sarasota on the Jacksonville on the 22nd, Sarasota on the 23rd, Pembroke, Massachusetts on the 27th, Broadbrook, Connecticut on the 28th. All that stuff's on my website,
Yep.
allenpaul.net, and also on Friends of the Brothers website. Most of those events are music, either with Friends of the Brothers or down in Florida. I'm hooking up with other bands, and I love doing that. I get to play, I get to talk, and it's way more fun than doing events in bookstores, which I've also done, and I love
Hmm.
bookstores. But I have this extra special thing where I can also play the music,
Yeah,
and
that's cool.
it's fun. And I do sell books to people who don't go to bookstores, and
Hmm.
that's cool. You're all my people. If you love this music, I don't care if you go to bookstores or don't go to bookstores. I'm happy to sell you a book and talk to
Hmm.
you. I love meeting people and just doing this. And most of these events I'll start off with conversation like this, where somebody
Hmm.
interviewed me for the most part. In Sarasota, it's Wade Tatangelo from the Sarasota Herald
Yep.
Tribune. We doing the interview, and then we play the music. So you get a little bit of everything, and I love it. I love doing it. The travel itself is tiring sometimes, but the events give me the energy, and I just love doing it. I feel blessed to be able to, and hope to see you in Sarasota, Ray,
Yeah,
and I see
definitely.
a lot of the people listening somewhere, but one of those places.
Real
If
quick,
you,
is there a story behind the guitar on the wall? I'm assuming it's a Fender.
oh my goodness, there is a story behind that guitar on the
Okay.
wall. I'll give it to you as fast as I can, but this guitar, if you see, it has
Arm Strat.
yeah, farm
Strat.
strat.
Yeah.
So this was a guitar that belonged to Brian Farmer, who was
Hmm.
Warren Haynes' guitar tech for years. Was a good friend of mine.
Hmm.
He died in 2014, midway through the last year of the Allman Brothers. His family sold his extensive guitar collection via Gruen Guitars.
Right.
Actually, was really upset because they just kind of threw it out there in Gruen. They didn't have like a Brian Farmer sale. A
Uh,
lot of Brothers fans would have,
sure.
but I found out about it, and I bought this guitar, and I brought it in
Nice.
to New York. Yeah, I fully intended to play it. It's a great guitar. It's a Mexican made
Hmm.
Fender Relic copy of, I think, a 57 or a 59. I think it's a 57 Strat. Um, I brought it into New York when the Allman Brothers were rehearsing in October 2014 for the last Beacon shows, their last shows ever, to show it to Warren, and ended up everyone in the band wanted to see it. And I don't usually ask for autographs in my life. I think but I did
Hmm.
on this one. I ended up
Yep.
getting everyone in the band to sign it. So
Nice.
became really special. Greg's the one guy I wasn't going to ask because I just was embarrassed.
I know. I'm the same way.
I didn't easy to ask for autographs. I asked Warren first because of his relationship with, and so Warren signed it, and Derek was sitting next to him, and
Hmm.
he said, he just went like this, like, and Oteil, they were right there, so they signed it, and then I was just going to walk away, and Butch goes, "What about me?" He was sitting right there. I'm like, "All right, Butchie." So Butch signed it, and then JMO, signed it, and again, I wasn't going to ask Greg, but I was walking away with it, and Greg goes, "Hey, man, come here." And I think that he thought it really was a 57 Strat.
Mm.
he didn't see everyone signing it. He just saw everyone looking at it and passing it around. And that everyone was so interested. And he goes, what do you got there, man? And I told him, I was like, well, this is Brian Farmer's Strat. And he goes, he was really close to Farmer. So he went like this, like, give me the guitar. So I handed it to Greg and he played it, which was cool. And then once he did that, I said, well, actually, Greg, everybody signed it. And so he was like this, like, give me the Sharpie. And
Nice.
So yeah, I don't know what I'll do with this now, but I'll just keep it on my wall. I guess I had it shellacked, so it's there forever.
Yeah, that's
I could
important.
Play it, but I've been hesitant to change the strings because they're Farmer strings.
Did you say you had Dickie's signature on there?
No, I don't have Dickie's signature.
Oh, well, when you're in Sarasota,
yeah, maybe. I have all the guys who were in the band in 2014.
Knock on his door, man. I'm serious.
Yeah. I'm in touch with Dickie's wife and talking to them about paying them a visit. I don't know yet if it's happening, but I wasn't planning on traveling with this guitar, but you make a good point. If I find out I'm going to see Dickie, I might just have to bring it down.
Well, if Dwayne was here, you would get in for sure. You know,
yeah. See him. And I'll be happy to go down another time with Dwayne. I mean, not with Dwayne, but when Dwayne's there in order to do that.
Yeah, Dickie's been kind of quiet lately. Everyone, he usually gets out and plays somewhere, a remote area or whatever, but he's been really quiet.
My sense is that you're not going to see Dickie playing in public anymore. He has come out to see Dwayne.
Right.
I don't think he's playing, and I don't expect to see him playing.
Yeah.
Let him enjoy his retirement.
Yeah, I agree with you. You're right. I want to say very special thanks to John Bleicher of Prospect PR for arranging this interview with Alan Paul. And you can purchase your book, Brothers and Sisters, the Allman Brothers Band, and the inside story of the album that defined the 70s. It's where do you want people to buy it? I know it's available at Amazon and all the avenues, but
you can buy it anywhere. I really don't.
Anywhere?
Okay. But I will say, for those of you in Sarasota, Sarasota Books, I will be there.
Good.
Out on Tuesday, the 24th in the afternoon. If you check their website, they'll be putting that info up, and they will have signed books there.
Oh, good.
Afterwards.
Awesome.
I'll be a bunch there. So I always say support your local bookstore if you can.
Yeah.
It'll be a little more expensive, but we like having them there. If money is a big issue for you, I understand that too, and Amazon will be the cheapest price. So appreciate your support however you buy it.
There's so much competition, man, in books nowadays, and everybody's writing a book.
Yeah, I've been fortunate that my books do pretty well, and they're still smaller than people think. It just you're right. It's tough to get the word out. So
very tough.
Let me do it.
And you have your official website, which is alanpaul.net. You're on Facebook.
You have a very active Facebook page. You can just for me on there, but it's alanpaul.net. I'm sorry, it's Alan Paul author. It's
author.
Facebook, Alan Paul author. Really easy to find. So
Twitter, Instagram, you're on Goodreads. We're all on Goodreads. And looking forward to seeing you at McCurdy's. It's gonna be awesome, man.
Look forward to it. See you there.
All right, Alan. It's been a pleasure, man.
Hey, thanks, Ray.
All right, take care.
Bye.
Bye.